Well, welcome to another Friday night. As we begin a new year, I thought I would go back to our reparenting series and talk about fears that we can't control. One of the things that every parent has to do is to help their children learn to manage fear, deal with fear. And sometimes there's fears we can control stuff and resolve them, and other times there's stuff that we can't control and we have to learn how to manage that. And reason I want to talk about this is because part of our LIFT program is we have people from over 30 countries in the world that take our program. And in interacting with them, one of the things that I see regularly these days is a lot of fear around the political climate of a lot of countries in the world. So as they look at their own governments or newly elected governments and they go, I feel afraid. Are we going to lose the values that we had, the freedoms that we had? What's going to happen to us if we disagree with the government? All of these different fears that begin to take place. And what I realize is that in many countries in the world, the political climate has created a complex trauma environment. The person is now in a country where they don't feel safe. They're in a country where they don't feel safe, but they can't control and resolve that fear and make it go away by making it safe. That's beyond their control. And so all of a sudden, it's like a child in a home where they don't feel safe, but there's nothing they can do about it. So when I work with people or a parent is helping a child with fear, it's very important to help that child begin to make the distinction of, can I control this or do I not have any control over this? And one of the most difficult types of fear for anybody is to be in a situation where it's totally out of your control, or even it's very difficult when you're in a situation where you can control a few things, but there's a bunch of stuff you can't control. And so you still feel, yes, I have some control, but I feel mainly out of control. I feel a helplessness that is really difficult to live with. And so what I want to do today is talk about 7 common fears that involve stuff we have no control over. You may not have thought of these. You may not have even realized that you had these fears, but I want to talk about them because I think it's really important just to bring it to our consciousness and to have an honest discussion about them. So what I want to begin with is that what I'm beginning to realize as I spend more and more time in this field over the years is that we all have fears that we're aware of, but we also have fears that we're not even aware that we have. They're in a subconscious place. So if you were to talk to 100 people and ask them how much fear they have right now and what those fears were, most people would be able to give you a pretty good answer. They'd be able to identify a lot of their fears and how severe they were. But what I think you would discover is that, again, most people, even those who are very self-aware, would probably have some fears that they're not even aware of. They're just at a subconscious level. Now, you might get some people, and this happens a lot, who would say, oh, I don't have any fear. The more you work with people, the more you realize, okay, they're probably lying because they probably have either buried their fear so deep that they're not even aware of it, or they've developed some slick mental game that just enables them to deny fear and act like they have no fear. But there's still fear there at a subconscious level, and it's probably ruling a lot of their life that they're not even aware of. So most of us are open to our fear, but we are unaware of it. And what it takes for us to become aware of some of those fears is for somebody to start identifying them, somebody to put words to them, somebody to name them. And if we're in an environment where we feel totally safe and we're not going to be judged, if we admit the fears, all of a sudden we're going to be able to go, okay, yeah, okay, I have that fear. I get it. I wasn't even conscious of it, but now that you put words to it, I connect to it. It resonates deep inside of me that fear is there. Let me add a second thing here. One of the things that I've found in working with people in recovery is most people have anxiety. Most people have grown up in an environment of complex trauma, which is an environment of fear. And as a result of that, they develop this misconception that if they get healthy, or a healthy person is a person who resolves every fear perfectly so that fear goes away. And so that a totally healthy person is a person who has no fear at all, no fear that isn't resolved, so they have no long-lasting fears. But is that true? The key to me is this: a healthy person resolves every fear that's resolvable. But a healthy person also realizes that the reality of life is there's some fears that you can't resolve totally. You can learn to manage those fears. You can learn to live with those fears in a healthy way, but there's certain things beyond your control that you can't resolve. And so you're going to have to learn to live with a certain amount of fear. And it's possible to do that. So becoming healthy does not mean you get rid of all fear. It means you get rid of some fear, but it also means you learn to manage and live in a healthy way with fears beyond your control. So let's talk about these fears beyond our control. To me, the reality of life is that there are millions of things beyond my control. I might not be consciously aware of them, but I think at some level our brain is aware of many things that are beyond our control. It's monitoring it. It's conscious of it, but the probability of some of it happening is small, so it puts it at a kind of subconscious level. This is not worth bringing onto the radar, getting all of the alarm systems going. It's possible, but it's a remote possibility. So the brain is constantly weighing out all of the millions of things that could happen to me, and weighing out, should I bring it to the radar or not? So just think of 8 billion people in the world, each person making decisions. Many of those decisions could affect me negatively. So that's billions of things that could happen that could harm me. Then you look at all of the variables in our climate beyond our control, geology, so you could have hurricanes, you could have earthquakes, you could have storms, you could have volcanoes. There's just one thing after another in the weather and the geology that could happen that could have terrible effects on me and I have zero control over. Then you just think of viruses. We've gone through COVID. We've gone through all kinds of different viruses, and it's realizing, wow, we have no control over that. So a new strain of virus could come and it could decimate our culture. It could hurt me badly. Then you go into just the engineering of machinery. So a plane could break down, a car could break down, I could be in a car accident, all of those things beyond our control. And so the bottom line is thousands of bad things could happen to me every day. Possibility might be fairly low, but it is a possibility. And our brain is aware of that. So the reality is that we live much of life with all kinds of unknowns. Every time I drive a car, I am facing thousands of unknowns because there's thousands of drivers on the road. And one of them could fall asleep. One of them could make a bad decision. All kinds of unknowns. So our brain is great at blocking out kind of the low probability unknowns, the fears that are very small and subtle. But once in a while, it allows those fears to come to the surface and to our conscious level. And for people from complex trauma, if you get too many of those fears coming to the conscious level, it could get very terrifying. It could get overwhelming. And then they could start to obsess about them, and that just causes them to grow and become even worse. So for most of us, if we're completely honest, we have to begin to realize, there's probably a whole bunch of very subtle fears just below the surface of all the unknowns in life, of all the things that could happen that are beyond my control. Car accidents, dementia, cancer, other sicknesses, financial problems, relationship problems, something bad happening to our kids. The list goes on and on of things that could happen that are beyond our control. How do we live with these fears in a healthy way? That's what I want to talk about. So I want to just identify 7 that I think are some of the biggest fears beyond our control that many have. So one would be fear of growing old. That's a terrifying thing for many people. Fear of getting sick, fear of dying, the fear that those closest to me will no longer be there for me. The fear that there will be consequences that I face today for decisions that I made in the past that were not good decisions. And now the consequences are going to come home to roost and haunt me. The fear that others will destroy my reputation. And in a world of social media, people can put all kinds of garbage out about you that could just destroy your reputation beyond your control. They can spread lies, all kinds of libel, that kind of thing. And then the fear that our child will make a bad choice that will deeply affect them negatively. So I just put those as what I would say are kind of the top 7 fears for many of things beyond their control. So let me show you how complex trauma really messes with this fear thing and can cause extra problems. So to begin with, we need to say again that fear originally was designed to be a good thing. It was designed to protect us. So when we're in a dangerous situation where we could get hurt, fear is an emotion that says, this is not safe to be here. You need to get out of here. You need to go to fight or flight. Fear was designed to be a very good thing. The problem with complex trauma is that fear could not be resolved by the child. So normally in a healthy fear situation, you experience fear because you're in danger. You go to fight or flight, you resolve the problem, the fear goes away. In complex trauma, the child can't go to fight or flight. The child can't resolve the fear. The fear does not go away. So they live in constant fear. Fear now is not a good thing. Fear becomes a negative force in their life. It no longer takes them and pulls them in a direction that is going to rescue them. It begins to take them and pull them in directions that actually hurt them and hurt others and result in maladaptations that are very harmful in the long run. And so when a child can't resolve fear, the child does not want to live with this constant emotion of fear. Who wants to live with this very negative, intense emotion that's terrifying? So the brain then goes to new approaches to try and deal with the fear. It can't resolve it, so what then can it do? So a bunch of different options begin to come to the surface that many people in complex trauma try all of the options and then settle on 1 or 2 of them. So some totally repress their fear. They just harden themselves. They try to act like they have no fear. And they will engage in risky behavior to prove to others that they're not afraid of anything. The problem is that even though you repress fear, you move it from the conscious level, but you put it to the subconscious level. And your subconscious brain is the biggest part of your brain. It's the part that controls you the most. And so the fear is still controlling you. The second option that the brain goes to is to dissociate from fear, to disconnect from your emotions. So there's different ways that you dissociate. Some, they would escape to a fantasy world. So in this world, they don't feel helpless. They don't feel afraid. They don't feel hopeless. They feel powerful. They feel like they're Superman. They wear a cape. In this world, there might be no danger, or there is danger, but it never bothers them because they can handle everything. So they're always safe and secure. Now, I need to make a note here. What I have found for people who have escaped to a fantasy world to get rid of their fear is that without realizing it, they can develop a belief when they come into recovery. And the belief is that once they get healthy, they'll be a Superman. Once they get healthy, they'll never experience fear. Fear will not exist in their life. They will be competent to handle every situation. And that is actually a lie. But it comes very naturally and easily out of somebody who's developed a fantasy world in complex trauma to deal with fear. There's a third thing the brain can do, and that is develop numbing activities. Let's engage in activities that numb me out, that just cause me not to feel. And so that can be eating to medicate emotions. That can be all kinds of just, let's go to zombie land through an activity. Then another thing is, let's engage in activities that just keep us too busy to feel emotions. So if I'm distracted by constant activity and busyness, then I won't feel my fear. So let's be a workaholic. Let's constantly be doing something. We can't sit quietly because then we would feel fear. Then another one is, let's find things that medicate our fear. So some people find drugs and alcohol, sex, other activities that just medicate fear. And so the brain is again looking for ways to try and not feel the emotion of fear. There's a third thing that the brain does when it can't resolve fear and it doesn't know how to get rid of fear. It then becomes hypervigilant. So if I'm constantly on alert, I'm hypervigilant, then I will spot danger. And maybe the more I can spot danger, then I will have less fear because I will be able to be proactive to prevent being in dangerous situations. What can happen though with that is that they're constantly focusing on the negative. Every time they're in change or in an unknown situation, they then go, something bad's going to happen. I need to just focus on negative. Then they start to obsess on negative. Then they start to anticipate fears. They begin to read danger into situations where there isn't danger because they just want to be prepared for everything. So let's read in danger, even though it might not be dangerous, just to be safe. But what you end up doing is creating in your brain something that you're trying to prevent. You create, I must be in danger all the time, belief in your brain. That's why I have to be hypervigilant. So now I'm always acting based on life is dangerous. And you're actually creating fear. So that one doesn't work. But then complex trauma creates underlying issues that actually feed fear. So you're trying to deal with fear, but you don't realize that there's other things that just keep feeding fear over and over constantly in your life. So shame. Shame is basically a fear emotion. It's basically, I'm not good enough. Anybody that gets to know the real me will reject me. So every time now I'm in a relationship, I feel fear because I'm pretty sure that if they get to know me, they're going to reject me, and that's scary. So shame is constantly feeding fear in a person. That then leads to codependency that comes out of complex trauma. I need you to like me in order for me to feel good about myself. I need you to meet my needs, but you can't see the real me because I'm pretty sure you're going to reject me. So we're going to do this constant dance And I'm hoping that you're going to meet my needs. I'm hoping that you're going to want me and like me, but I'm pretty sure you won't. And that creates fear. So codependency is basically relationships that are formed that have shame and fear at their very core. And then what comes out of complex trauma for many is a fear of failure. So failure is not a good thing where I learn from. Failure is always a bad thing that leads to more pain because I get judged and criticized and condemned and shunned. So I'm constantly needing to be perfect. I'm constantly needing to make everybody happy. And so I set unrealistic standards for myself. That just creates more fear because I can't be perfect. I can't meet those standards. Another thing that comes out of complex trauma is I put my value in the wrong things. I don't believe I have inherent value, that I'm not valuable just the way I am. The only way I have value is through externals, through my accomplishments, through my body. So if my value is based on having the perfect body, what happens when I'm getting older? That creates fear. If my value comes from my accomplishments, which then becomes my job, what happens as I face retirement and I no longer have my job to give me value? Who am I then? What will my source of value be? That creates fear. If my value comes from my possessions, from my wealth, my money, what happens if the economy changes? What happens if my financial world gets upset? That creates fear. So every time I place my source of value in externals, I create an environment where fear is going to be fed whenever anything changes. Another thing that comes out of complex trauma is trust issues. And so think of it this way. What enables a child to be at peace and not have fear? It's not because they have all kinds of tools. It's because their parents that they've connected with and that they know love them have tools, and they trust their parents. And because they trust totally, they have peace. They don't have fear. So trust becomes an important piece when it comes to dealing with fear. Now, what happens as the child gets older is they learn the tools from their parents so they can handle more and more situations, so they begin to trust themselves. For some people, there's a spiritual component to this where they trust a higher power to help them in situations. But trust of others, of self, of higher power becomes key in dealing with fear. But what happens with complex trauma? It destroys trust. You don't even trust yourself. You know you don't have tools. You don't like yourself. You don't like the decisions you've made in your life in the past. And so you just stop trusting others, yourself, a higher power, and now you're basically facing the world alone with no trust, no tools, and that feeds fear. Then there's another element to complex trauma, and that is initially in complex trauma, you go to fight or flight whenever there is fear, whenever you're in danger. But then what the brain does to try to protect you is it goes to fight or flight whenever it has an uncomfortable emotion, whenever it has a little bit of anxiety, a little bit of depression, a little bit of sadness, anger, any emotion that is uncomfortable the brain is pretty sure it's going to lead to a dangerous situation. So now instead of going to fight or flight whenever there's danger and there's legitimate fear, it now goes to fight or flight as soon as it feels an uncomfortable emotion. Let's get out of here now. Let's get out of here early because we're pretty sure it's going to go to danger. So what is happening with that is the brain is tolerating uncomfortable emotions less and less. Your capacity to sit in an uncomfortable emotion is diminishing. So now, the minute you feel an uncomfortable emotion, you get antsy, you get panicky, you want to get out of here, you want to escape. So That comes out of complex trauma. Now, every emotion actually is causing you fear. Then there's one other thing that comes out of complex trauma, and that is this. What happens in dealing with fear is we can deal with fear if our stress level has been fairly low, if we're well rested and we have lots of energy. Because of those things, our emotional gas tank is full. Our bandwidth is broad. We're able to handle stuff a whole lot better because we have good energy, good resources available to us. But what happens if we're stressed out? What happens if we're exhausted? What happens if we're feeling overwhelmed? The slightest little thing causes us to just want to run. The slightest little thing creates fear. We just don't have the bandwidth to deal with it. It's too much. And so for a person coming out of complex trauma, their stress system is easily activated. They get overwhelmed easily. They're exhausted frequently. And so it leaves them in a state that actually feeds fear, that just puts them in a place where they just want to get out of here. So what I want you to see is complex trauma takes this whole good emotion of fear and basically makes it a bad emotion, and then creates all kinds of systems to try and help deal with it, but actually make things worse. They actually end up feeding fear, and fear becomes this thing that is getting worse and worse, and I can't resolve. It's a growing monster. So how do we deal with fear in a healthy way? Now, we've talked about fears we can resolve in other videos. What I want to talk about today is how do I deal with these fears that are beyond my control, that I can't just resolve? How do I learn to live with them? How do I learn to manage them? So let me begin by giving you kind of a big picture overview, and then I'll get into some specifics. So number one, honestly admit the fear and face it. It's healthy to acknowledge a fear, but not be controlled by it. That's the key. So by acknowledging the fear, I'm naming it, and that helps me not be controlled by it. I'm identifying it. Allow yourself to feel the fear, to be present with the fear, to be honest about how that affects you. Be honest about other emotions that it affects as well. It might lead to some sadness, some grief, some anger. It might lead to all kinds of different emotions. Just get to know that emotion and that fear emotion and its effect on you. Accept that you can't control the things that are causing this fear. It is beyond your control. Ground yourself. Get out of your limbic brain. Get yourself to a calmer place, into your cortex. That's what's going to be a key tool. And then get to a point where you're able to just let go of that fear. I can't control it, so I'm not going to obsess on it. I'm not going to let it control me. I'm not going to let it be a torturous person that's always with me. I'm just going to let go of that. I'm going to have to trust something, and then fully embrace life now. Learn to live in the present. Don't be preoccupied with things you can't control that are out there, that are just possibilities in the future. Learn to fully embrace the present. So that's kind of the big picture of where we're going. Now let me break it down a little bit with some practical things. When I face a fear, often I don't know, is this something I can control or is this something I can't control? So I ask myself some questions. Number one, is this my responsibility? Number two, can I control it? I just really make that something I need to define and look at very carefully. Sometimes I ask myself, am I trying to play God in this situation? Do I think I have to be something I'm not in order to fix this situation? Is this really beyond my ability to control, but something in me thinks that it should be in my ability? It's not accepting that I'm human. In other words, are my expectations of myself and of this situation realistic. And sometimes still don't know if I can control this, if I can resolve this, so do I need more information? Because sometimes a fear that I have might be due to lack of information. I've been told something, but I don't know if it's true. I don't know if there's anything I can do about it. I need more information. So there's just some good questions that we can ask ourselves. Then work on developing increased tolerance for sitting in uncomfortable emotions. So I've had so many clients come to me and they're in this uncomfortable emotion. They go, I need to talk to you right now. And basically what they're wanting is for me to make that emotion go away. Now, I know from knowing them and their situation that what's happening in their life is not something disastrous. It's not something that can be resolved right away or needs to be resolved right away. I see this for them a good learning experience. So what I say to them is, you know what? I think it might be a really good thing right now for you to just sit with that emotion for a day and we'll talk about it tomorrow. Now, usually they don't like me for that. They think I'm being cruel, but in most cases, they come back to me the next day and they go, wow, I made it through that. I actually learned from that. I learned some tools to handle that. That was actually a good experience. And they increased their ability to tolerate distressing emotions. There's another thing that I think is so important for people who are living with lots of different fears. It gets so easy to get obsessed with the fears. Find a bigger purpose in life. If you have a direction in life, if you have a clear sense of purpose in life, what you find is you get focused on that. You get preoccupied with that. And that causes a lot of the fears to lose their power. They almost begin to diminish because you're just so preoccupied with the good stuff that you're doing in your life. Next, make sure you find a refuge or a safe harbor in your life and that you develop the ability to trust. Those are so important. Dealing with fear means connecting to safe people who are trustworthy and trusting them. Knowing that I can turn to them in situations and have them help me. But it also means I need to develop a safe refuge with myself. I need to be able to trust myself, to learn the tools and learn that those tools work and that I can use those tools competently so that I develop a trust in myself as a safe refuge. But then if I feel like I'm in a dangerous situation, I also need, in many cases, a safe place where I can go to get away from the danger. That's going to be my safe refuge to help me get grounded. For some people who don't have a physical place they can go to at the moment, they need to develop visualization skills so they can go to a safe place in their mind that just helps them be grounded. That just is a place they can go to and know they're safe there. So find a safe place, a refuge that you can go to, whether it's people, just developing it with yourself, that you can trust yourself, or a physical place or a visualization. Now, you're still going to have fears that pop into your head. If that happens, a couple of things to be aware of. First of all, in many cases, if it's a low probability stuff, if it's beyond your control, you develop tools to just redirect your thoughts. I'm not going to feed those fears. I'm not going to obsess about those fears. I'm just going to put my mind onto something else. So don't feed it. But be very aware of this. What comes out of complex trauma is what I refer to as kind of an 80-20 rule. And that is when fear kicks in, we don't see a situation accurately anymore. So let's say there's 20% danger, 80% safety. But what happens when that 20% is triggered of fear, danger, and I begin to obsess on the fear, all of a sudden, it's like it's 100%. I'm in total danger. This is a scary, scary thing. This is terrifying. All of a sudden, everything gets blown out of proportion. That's how the complex trauma mind works when fear is triggered. So just be very aware of that when fear is triggered, my tendency is I'm going to blow stuff out of proportion. I'm not going to see things accurately because I'm in my limbic brain, so I need to get grounded. Another important tool in coming out of complex trauma is acknowledging I can't control that situation, but then focusing on what I can control. So I'm not being dishonest. I'm not denying stuff that I can't control. I'm going, no, that's very real. I can't control it, but I'm not going to focus on it. I'm going to focus on what I can control. That is such an important thing. I think there's another piece here for many people coming out of complex trauma. When you lived in an environment of fear all your life, your limbic brain has not experienced a lot of healthy brain chemicals. It hasn't had a lot of positive emotional experiences. And so it's more vulnerable to be triggered by fear because that's its normal. That's where it has lived all its life. And so part of healing the limbic brain is providing it regularly with positive emotional experiences, fun, pleasure, healthy escapes, healthy connection, things that help the limbic brain develop a healthy normal, a more positive emotional normal. Work on that. That will help the overall fear situation. Next thing is when you realize that your fear is being triggered, stop and ask yourself, okay, I think I see what is triggering my fear, but is there anything else going on in my life that might be contributing to this fear being triggered right now? And often what you're going to find is, oh yeah, I'm feeling a lot more stress than normal. So I'm in a more vulnerable place to get triggered by fear. Or I'm very tired. So my bandwidth just isn't very wide right now. So that's why this fear is being triggered. Or you know what? I'm just feeling kind of discouraged or a bit depressed, or I'm grieving a little bit. Okay, that's taking its toll on me emotionally, which is causing me to not have the normal emotional reserves to handle stuff. So just be curious about what else is going on in my life that might be contributing to all of this right now. There's another piece here that is so important, and that is learning to accept my limitations, learning to accept that I'm not God. I can't control everything. I can't fix this problem if I just try harder. There are some things that are beyond my control. I will never be able to control them because I'm a human. That is hard for many people in complex trauma to accept. But until they do, they are going to just feed fear because they think they should be able to handle every contingency if they just try harder, think more, figure stuff out more. But it's impossible. So learning to accept your limitations is so important. And then I think it's important for people to just grow in mindfulness, to stop yourself 2, 3, 4 times a day and just get quiet, go inward and go, where's my fear at? Be aware of it. How intense is it? Can I identify what it's about? Just become more aware of your fear level, because for many people coming to complex trauma, they're not aware of fear until it's kind of 8 out of 10, 9 out of 10, 10 out of 10. It's got to be really intense for them to be conscious of it. Stuff that's at 3, 4, and 5, they're not even aware of because it's not even on their radar yet. Learn to become aware of the stuff that's at the 3, 4, and 5 level. That just is so important for you. Next, be very careful that you don't fall into trying to resolve your fears through magical thinking, through superstitious thinking. So a person with OCD, they feel fear And what is their response? Well, if I turn this light off 3 times, if I tap 3 times, if I double check 3 times, if I do this little ritual, that'll make my fear go away. And it seems to work. It seems to work for a period of time, and then it stops working. That's the magical thinking that people can develop around getting rid of fear. If I just do this ritual, some get some of that magical thinking through their religious groups that just say, do this, and that'll make your fear go away. And they try to buy into it, and it seems to help for a bit, but it's actually making things worse. Religious groups can also be engaged in what is spiritual bypassing. And it's just, here's a verse, follow that, that'll make everything better instantly. So the whole point is you never have to sit in an uncomfortable emotion for any period of time. We can just magically make it disappear. Beware of that kind of stuff. So let me end with this. To me, the desired state, the place I want to get to, is to be able to say honestly to myself, okay, I'm going into another day. If I get in an accident, it's beyond my control. If it happens, it happens. There's nothing I can do about it. It does me no good to worry about it. But if it does happen, I have the tools to deal with it. I have the people in my life that are going to support me to get through it. I will actually grow from it. Yes, it'll be painful. Yes, it'll be difficult, but it won't be the end of the world. I can grow through this. So that means that I no longer see things through the complex trauma eyes, that something bad is the end of the world. I now see something bad as I can handle this. I can resolve this. I can grow from this. That can actually I can be resilient and become better because of it. So that's where I want to get to. But what that is also saying is I'm accepting life on life's terms. I can't make everything the way I want it. There's things beyond my control. So I accept that. But I also know I have the tools and the support to handle it. So doesn't mean I want bad things to happen. It just means if they do happen, it's not the end of the world. But it's also saying this: I am not going to focus on all the what ifs. I'm not going to focus on all the things that could happen beyond my control. I am going to learn to be fully present in the present, to connect with people, to be there for people, to be there for myself, to take care of myself in the present. I am not going to let fear continue to pull me out of the present and to get me preoccupied with the past or the future. I want to learn to live in the present. So that is a little bit about dealing with fear of things I can't control. And that's much of our life. And I hope it helps you. I hope it makes you aware maybe of some of the things that are happening in your life that you weren't even conscious of, that you just now can be aware of and have tools to manage. So that's the end of another Friday night. Again, thank you for being here. Hope that helps. Have a great weekend. We'll see you.